emotional.
Yeah. Well, I've got the first two recordings over there if you missed the first 2 weeks. Today is the last of the series of three. We've been talking about feelings. We talked about loneliness 2 weeks ago. We talked about family problems last week. And today we're asking the question, what's the point of feelings anyway? Why are we talking about feelings? Why is that even important? So that's what we're going to talk about today. We're small in numbers, so feel free to jump in if you've got a question, you've got a comment. I'm always interested.
I'll say something right off the top.
Great.
Our youth director, Charlie, was preaching today, and in his sermon, he said, you know, I am just amazed that our church talks about things like feelings. My church didn't talk about feelings for 18 years when I was growing up. So kudos to you, Mark. Thank you.
Thank you. This is a progressive crowd. We've been talking about feelings for over 30 years, I know, because I've been doing it. I still get, it's surprising, but I still get people in my office who don't really understand why we're talking about feelings. It's mainly men, but I still get that. We're still trying to figure that out. What's the place of that? So let's start with a prayer. Lord, thank you for this place and for these people. Pray, Lord, you would bless these next few minutes, that they would be fruitful, that we would learn how to engage our hearts with you and with others better. In the name of Jesus, we pray. Amen.
Amen.
So we're often struggling with our emotions, and the metaphors we often use when we talk about emotions are like we're embattled with them. We say things like we're overwhelmed, we're flooded, I wrestled with, I battled with. When we talk about our feelings, we don't often talk about them in friendly ways. And we want to, I think we need to kind of reframe how we approach feelings. Feelings are information. Most guys I can get to at least agree to that. You're making decisions based on half the information that you need. And emotions are data that you need to make good decisions. So that's half the data is missing. You know what you think, but you don't know what you feel. Then you're making decisions with only half the information that you need. So I know we talk about some emotions being good and some emotions being bad, and I know what you mean by that. You say like being depressed is bad, and that's a bad emotion, or being angry is bad. I don't like that terminology. I like to talk about emotions being painful or not. Some emotions are happy, like love. Some emotions are painful, like anxiety. But I don't like the terminology good and bad because it makes us try to avoid them. And trying to avoid your feelings can lead to bigger problems in your life. They don't go away just because you avoid them. Often when we stuff our feelings to try and avoid them, they come out later, and they don't come out nice when they come out later. So we want to try to deal with them in the moment. Now, let me start with a disclaimer. You also don't want to live by your emotions all the time. This is not, you know people like this. And psychology has been very guilty of this, trying to make people think that really what's healthy, emotional health means talking about your feelings all the time. When they come up, you just let them out, and that's what health is. I repent of that. As a representative of psychology, we repent of that notion. It's not true that you should just live by your emotions all the time. And people can get caught up in emotions and drug on to do not good things. Last week I happened to mention the Salem witch trials, and somebody said there was a book out on it. Right, Bill O'Reilly's book. So I got it because I thought I was going to learn something, right? He does a very good research. If you've read his Killing series of Killing Jesus and Killing Kennedy, I think, and 2 or 3 others. Well, he extensive research in the book. He starts off the book talking about the burning of a witch in Scotland. And then he goes on to talk about our American trials in Salem. We arrested and accused and arrested 200 men and women of being witches, and then we executed 20. But I'm proud to say we did not burn any of them. We hung them. So
There was one that was hanged.
Most of them were hung.
I mean burned. I think there was only one that was burned in the U.S.
None burned in the U.S. No, none burned. He says in the end of the book, no, contrary to the popular misconception, there are no witches burned in the United States, where it's a point of pride for us. That it was illegal to burn people in the United States, but we did hang them.
Yeah.
So the point is this, his point is this, and he was trying to get at cancel culture. That was his thing. The cancel culture is not new, that we've been canceling people in much more violent ways than we do even now. It's groupthink. And it's a scary thing when mob mentality can take over and people are caught up with their emotions and we run off in a direction because everybody else is going in that direction. And we need someone to stop and slow down. And often when we get in fights in marriage, the one thing that I tell people is slow down, just slow down. It doesn't, let me give you this tip. This is free, because it's not in my notes. Don't say to people, calm down. That just makes them mad.
Yeah.
Just say, let's slow down. Just slow down. You're going so fast. I can't follow you. This is too fast. Can we slow down? You're going to be much more effective than telling people to calm down. That's like putting a lid on a pressure cooker. You don't want to do that. But I think his point was a good one, that getting caught up and swept up in emotions is not always good. It's not always a good thing. We need to sometimes slow down. I need to slow down sometimes. I get caught up in too emotional at times, with not slowing down to figure out what the emotions might mean. And for years ago, well, actually here in Santa Monica, there was a very famous psychologist who started, his name was Janoff. Anybody remember that name, Janoff, here in Santa Monica? He did primal scream therapy. Remember this? You guys go through Janoff's training?
Yeah.
You did? I've had clients come to me afterwards, after they've gone through. He did things, I don't know if you did when you went through, but he did things, my client that I saw, they padded the room so it'd be soft. And they gave everybody batakas. Remember what those are? Rubber bats. They would beat each other with these batakas to get their emotions out. So that was the theory, that was a primal scream theory, is you want to get people just to get their emotions out. That's healthy. Let's get our emotions out. It's not right. The guy that I saw who was in Janoff's group afterwards thought that was good. So he was screaming and yelling and hitting things and throwing tables. And the therapist came up to him and said, "What are you doing?" He said, "I'm just trying to express my feelings." They said, "Well, you can't do that here." So they kicked him out of the group for having too many feelings. All right, so we're going to understand today how that could happen. What went wrong there? What was wrong with our thinking? Remember Fritz Perls and Gestalt therapy? Remember that? I'm quoting Fritz Perls, who started Gestalt therapy. This is his axiomatic statement of what he believed people should do. I do my thing and you do your thing. I'm not in this world to live up to your expectations, and you are not in this world to live up to mine. You are you, and I am I, and if by chance we find each other, it's beautiful.
You do you.
You do you.
Yeah.
Well, where he was wrong. That's not right. It's not if by chance we meet, it's beautiful, and that our connection is we're independent, totally independent people, and how we influence each other doesn't matter. Psychology used to say, you can't make someone else feel their feelings. Their feelings are their feelings. You know, if you get angry at me, I say, well, that's your anger. I can't make you angry. You're angry. You're in control of your own anger. I'm here to tell you, you can make people angry. Are you married? You can make people angry with a look, you know, or not a look, like you saw with the film on the first week. Not responding people can make them very, very angry. So it's not true. We are fundamentally relational creatures. We're fundamentally connected to each other. And these ideas were wrong. We're wrong-headed. What my friend who went through Janoff didn't understand, and what the trainers didn't understand, is that just expressing your emotions is not enough. You need to express your emotions in a way that connects you to other people. So if you say your feelings in a way, we do need to say them, but you need to say it in a way that other people can hear and respond to. We need a response. And the reason he escalated and started turning tables over and screaming and yelling, because he wasn't getting the response that was helpful to him. No one was just responding. They were just saying, good job for getting your feelings out, you know, until they said, bad job. No, you can't come back anymore. Living solely by your emotions is not necessarily a good thing. So that's my disclaimer up front. We want to live wisely with our emotions, not just solely by them. Listening to Winston Churchill expound at length on his political opinions, Lady Astor grew more and more furious. Finally, unable to contain herself, she snapped, "If you were my husband, I'd put poison in your coffee." Winston replied, "If I were your husband, I'd drink it." Yeah, I can see that coming. Living solely by your emotions is not what I'm advocating. I'm advocating being aware of them, paying attention to them, understanding them, and expressing them in a way that connects us to each other. That's their most important function, and that's the point I'm going to try to make today. Who we are is largely determined by what we feel in our hearts. Jesus said, "For a man's heart determines his speech." It's an interesting statement. A man's heart determines his speech. So whether you know it or not, you're feeling things faster than you can think. And we've talked about that. I'm going to give you some examples. So the smarter you are about knowing how you feel, the smarter things you're going to say. The more clueless you are about how you feel, the more clueless things you're going to say. We know that our brain development is actually dependent upon emotional responsiveness. A guy by the name of Alan Shore has researched this extensively, that you don't just need intellectual tasks growing up. As children, they need their emotions responded to have their brains develop wholly. And so now we are very aware of the importance of touch and focusing on children's emotions in order to help them develop their brains. So all those times you said, "Yes, I see the car. Yes, it's red. Oh, yes, that's a pretty dog." Every time you said those very simple things that were focusing in on something a child was feeling, you were helping brain development. Somehow we just knew to do those things, right? So what are feelings? They're automatic bodily appraisal of the environment. Automatic bodily appraisal of the environment. You're assessing the environment and you're doing it in your body. And mainly, I'm determining what's good and what's bad. I like this, I don't like this. I want to go towards this, I want to go away from that. And think about this in terms of evolution. It has to be very, very quick, right? You got to make decisions quickly. We make intuitive judgments, and we make them very, very quickly. If you like someone, if you don't like someone. And you remember it too. A year from now, you will not remember 2% of what I'm telling you today. But what you will remember is how you felt. You'll remember, "Oh, I liked that guy," or "Boy, he was full of it. He didn't know what he was talking about." But you'll remember that. You'll remember how you felt. That's part we don't forget because it guides us. It tells us who to be close to, who to not be close to. It'll tell you whether or not you want to come back next year in January or not. It's based on that feeling. And the rest of us will have to go to our notes to remember what I said. So these automatic bodily appraisals of the environment, telling us to know what's good and what's bad, helps us understand the world around us and how we think. And we've actually done research with animals, the mammals that also have the emotional center of the brain, primarily the amygdala. That's the part of the brain that feels very quickly. And when those areas of the brain in animals are severed, in research they do these things, the animals can't determine good from bad anymore. They don't know, should I eat this or should I eat that? They eat the wrong thing. Younger animals will go up to the primary male and poke it, which you don't do, and they couldn't discern good from bad because they severed their ability to just pick up things with the amygdala. So feelings tell us something about good and bad, and they tell it automatically. And the feelings are different. And we've measured this with galvanic skin response. Anger makes blood flow to the hands. And when you get angry, your hands heat up. We think maybe for strangling, you gotta be ready. Fear makes body go away from the hands and go into the big muscles in your body. We think maybe like for running. So we can tell that not all emotions are the same and they do different things in our body. You've heard about people getting cold feet when on their wedding day, when maybe they were afraid. That's literally true. If you were afraid when you got married, your feet were cold because you might need to run. So the blood is going to your muscles. So there are differences that we can measure them because our feelings are trying to tell us different things. We know that the chemical composition of a tear is different when you cry because of sadness as opposed to crying because you got poked or you smelled an onion. So physical reasons for your eyes to tear up are different than psychological reasons.
Huh.
Yeah, some proteins are different in those tears.
Who thought to do that?
Yeah, no kidding. Some of these people have a lot of time on it. Let's measure, first let's make people cry. Then,
Can I ask you a question there?
yeah,
Your opening phrase was automatic assess.
Yep.
And my mind is trying to, if it's automatic, did you really accept?
you're making an appraisal. You're making an automatic appraisal. Yeah,
Yeah, but it's automatic, so it's not appraising.
it is appraising, but it's out of your conscious awareness. You can unconsciously,
But so you have no control over the appraisal though, really, because
No.
it's automatic.
you don't have any control over it, but you're automatically making judgments
So,
all the time. But well, we'll talk about it in a minute, but we think the brain operates on two levels. There's a fast speed and a slow speed. Was it Kahneman that wrote the book Thinking Fast and Slow? Brilliant book. He got the Nobel Peace Prize in economics, a psychologist. That there are times when I need to make a decision very, very, very quickly, and that's the amygdala is driving that. And you're making a decision, and we call it intuitive thinking. I intuitively know when I like someone and I don't like someone, and you know it instantly. Then the slower road, which we call deliberative thinking, requires concentration and thinking, and you have to engage the prefrontal cortex, and you've got to research, and that's a conscious decision. So really, it kind of, I hate to do this, but we're validating Freud. There is an unconscious part of the brain, a brain that operates out of our awareness. But I think what it is it's the emotional part of the brain that's making these assessments, making these judgments, and it remembers. It's stored in memory. So you know if you like someone and you don't forget. And also, let me just throw this in. Once you make this intuitive judgment, then you look for facts to support it. And that's why people disagree so much. You know, they've already decided what they believe about something. Now they're they're only going to read the facts that support what they believe. Because I believe it, right? That's why people in your family cannot talk about politics at Thanksgiving. Because facts don't matter. Facts don't matter. They already know what they believe. Yeah.
Do these automatic responses, are they formed by your experiences and your education to some extent?
I'd like experiences better. Education sounds like it's thinking, right? Prefrontal
Yeah.
cortex.
Your
But yes.
experiences,
Yes.
so, because of the things that happen to you in your life, that automatic response can change.
It can. Yes. It takes a lot of work. We call it therapy. Yeah, people come in with these automatic responses based on their experiences, and they tend to be kind of rigid. I know it's true because I've experienced it, right? And we can slowly add new experiences that can become more dominant, right? And it takes time. Yeah.
I sort of have a question or an issue with other people's.
Yeah.
People are, often expressing their feelings.
Yep.
And if my mind understands, the truth and the rationality and the thinking of that person, I can, I can either identify or have compassion or whatever. But when feelings expressed seem, crazy, irrational, not truthful, not based in reality, my response is laughter, because I find that kind of entertaining, amusing, and funny. However, it's very counterproductive when dealing with that person.
Yeah.
I'm glad you figured that out. Yeah.
So I guess the question is, when it comes to feelings,
Yeah.
some are based much more in reality, and some are based in something that is just bizarre. And being a person that has to deal with these people that are having these kinds of emotions that I cannot identify on any basis in truth, it becomes really difficult.
Yeah.
a response.
Right. There's a whole lot there. Let me say this, I probably wouldn't, say things like reality, because to them, they're convinced it's true, right? So if you say what you're saying is not based in reality, it's not truthful. To them it is. And so the most effective way to deal with emotions is for you to be aware of your own. That's the most effective thing, because people are looking for an emotional response to their emotions. And as I just said, we will look for data to support our intuitive conclusions. We all do that. And once you get that, hopefully you'll be kinder in your conversation with them to try and get at, well, what's the feeling underneath there? Are they afraid? Are they angry? Are they sad? What's the what are they trying to tell me that has an emotional valence to it? Because if every conversation has two levels. There's what we think and then what we feel. Every conversation, and especially personal conversations, they're driven by the feeling part. And you know this because how many just ridiculous arguments have you had over nothing with someone that you feel very close to? And people dig in and fight harder and harder because they don't feel understood. And you have to drop down to the emotional level of fear. Okay, what's going on here emotionally? And if we can have that conversation, then we can go back to the thinking part and hopefully sound more rational. But especially in intimate relationships, like family relationships, it's driven by your feelings much more than what you think.
It's hard.
It's hard work
And it requires, I think, a commitment,
on both parts.
a real commitment to want to understand
Correct. And
and discipline.
all that, and to be aware that these emotions are what's driving the conversation, because you don't know that. You just absolutely think it's about Trump, and that's our conversation. Well, we're all, see, everybody gets triggered by that word. We've all got feelings that are driving our what seems to us on the other side like irrational beliefs, it seems to us. And that's how they think about us too. Yeah.
An explanation for you're in a group of people and there's a person there that you don't know a lot of the people, and that person, you have really negative feelings about them, very much so.
Yeah.
And then you get to know them, and then it goes totally the opposite direction, that you like them more than you like a lot of the other people.
Yep.
So why is it you have a strong negative at first and then a strong positive after?
We make those, that's the amygdala making an immediate assessment. They're reminding you of somebody that you know you don't like, and you pick up on maybe it's the way they were standing or the way they were dressed, tone of their voice. These are all subliminal things that the amygdala picks up on. You're not thinking about this with your prefrontal cortex. It's not rational. I'm just picking up signals. This is a fight or flight. To survive, we've had to have this part of the brain. I need to know when to run and when to fight to stay alive. So we make those assessments, but they're not always right. That's the unfortunate part. So also we have in our brain what's called mirror neurons. I've talked about that here before, that we're hardwired to assess the intent of the other person. So if you have a cup of coffee and you raise your cup of coffee, something in my brain says, I need a cup of coffee, and I mirror in my brain, and it has to do with the motor neurons. I can tell where you're going, and we've needed to do that. I need to know when you're going to be a threat to me, right? You're going to throw that spear at me? Is that the throwing posture? So I got to throw my spear first. So we have these mirror neurons where we think we know where you're going with what you're saying and with what you're doing. It's built in, hardwired, built in, but we're not always right. That's why you have these fights with the person, and if you were once married to, and you had that fight, I know where you were going with that comment. I know what you meant. That's your mirror neurons, but you're not always right. We just think we know where people are going. And so you made that assessment because somehow that person was a threat to you. Then you got to know that person. Oh, I was wrong about that. Good for you that you could get over that and realize that, no, I kind of misjudged them. And now I actually kind of feel closer to them. Once you found out who they really are. So yes, we're built this way. Yes, the brain does that, but it's not always right. You have to keep that in mind.
It's going to jump in because that reminds me a lot of in war and in conflict. Oftentimes the people, like soldiers, will often have this uncanny connection with the enemies on the other side after the war is over.
Yep.
Because in some ways, just having that strong bond of conflict between each other also puts a bond between them that's theirs for life.
Yep, for life. Right, we found, we were in the trenches together, really. We survived this awful thing called war, and there's a bond there that happens between them, yeah. Yes,
Similar to that, I think it's, something, first time I experienced it was I was 16, I happened to get stuck in the middle of a student protest in Rome. And coming out of a post office, there was this crowd of people running down the alley in food, right? And it took all of my discipline to control my legs because they wanted to join the crowd
Right,
running.
join the
It's like,
crowd.
if they're running in fear, I should be running too.
Yep.
And it's like, wait, this is not my student protest. I don't see what they're running from. I don't see any facts and evidence that say there should be a need to run, but I remember distinctly, it was a very transforming moment.
Yep.
Because it was this realization that herd mentality.
Yep.
Really can grab you.
Yes.
It's visceral. The blood was flowing to your muscles and your hands were cold in that
Yeah.
moment because you needed to run. The herd's running. We should run. The herd's running, right? Run. It's that built into us. Think about it. All of civilization has been that primitive up until just very recent. You know, the advancements we have now are very recent in history. Was there another hand? I have more stuff.
I think that one of the things that I'm so acutely aware of in our charged political situation
Yeah.
is assuming and when we are assuming other people's motives.
Yep.
And that is so dehumanizing and it's so hopeless. There's a hopelessness in that. If you tell somebody that you are born this way and that you have these internal biases, where do you go with that?
When we assess other people in that way, we make a moral judgment of them.
Yeah,
Yeah, the conversation stops. You know,
yeah.
that's not a conversation. And you're right, it's worse now than I think it's been before. We're not having the kind of dialogue and conversation and meaningful conversation about important things. You know, we are canceling, we're witch burning, we're just doing it today, the way we do it today. Let me tell you about Joseph Ledoux and his research on the amygdala. Oh, I mentioned this last week. They would put people in a room and put some they look like Chinese letters, but they weren't. They were made up in front of them. And they were going to ask them to tell me what you think it means. But first, they flashed a picture, a fraction of a second, of an angry face or a scary face. Just flashed it. And if you flash it fast enough, nothing registers in your prefrontal cortex where we have language, but it does register in the amygdala where we have feelings, right? So they can measure this in the brain. So we know your amygdala picked up a signal, but you didn't see it, so you don't even know it. And then they ask people, well, what do you think these words mean? And without a statistically in a significant way, people responded with negative. These words mean something negative, right? So the amygdala, when it picks up on something, now the world looks negative. And I don't even know why. I just know the world looks negative. When they slowed down the picture, and they showed the picture for a full second, so they knew, oh, I'm looking at an angry face, looking at a scary face, and then read the letters, there was no effect. So once you engage your thinking process, that disarms, you might say, the amygdala. Once you're feeling something, but you don't know you're feeling something, it influences you greatly. And that's why we get caught up. We get caught up in going in this direction because I'm feeling something. I don't know why I'm feeling something, but I know it's negative. I'm not sure what those guys believe, but I know it's wrong, right? And then what we do, and you know this, you only watch that program that's going to support your beliefs, and you never watch that program that might challenge your beliefs, right? We only want to take in information that's going to support what we already know is true. And we all do it. So I know you're thinking of somebody else right now. But I'm here to tell you, we all do that. We all do that. We want to reinforce what we already feel, that we already think we know. Ledoux calls it, we're primed. We're primed by the amygdala. We're primed by primary emotions that we don't even know we have to then evaluate the world in a negative or positive way. Negative or positive way. And the amygdala is 5 times faster than the prefrontal cortex. Doesn't stand a chance. You know, once it's registered and you feel it, you can't think your way out of it. You have to have experiences to help calm you down and change. That's what Daniel Kahneman called the thinking fast and thinking slow. Jonathan Haidt describes it this way, that really it's like a rider on an elephant, like a small rider. He's a small guy too, like a jockey-sized rider on an elephant. The elephant is your emotions, the amygdala, and the rider is your thinking. Now, you can control the elephant except when it wants to run away. There's nothing you can do. If the elephant wants to go rogue, you're going rogue. And that is how our brain operates for survival reasons, And I think we need to figure out how to understand how the brain operates in order for us to effectively live today in our society. Because not that often is the lion going to jump out of the woods anymore, but you are getting scared and your amygdala is running away with you. And so we have to figure out how we're going to manage these emotions in an effective way. Well, so those are emotions, they're automatic. They get started long ago and they keep repeating once we, get going in a certain direction with what we believe is true. So what's good about emotions? What's good about emotions is that we now believe that they are what motivates us and they are what connects us. So Freud used to think we're motivated by drives. We have this libido and death instinct. And he was just,
Blah, blah, blah.
yeah, he was just trying to make stuff up. He didn't know.
He had issues.
Well, yeah, it's cocaine addict, but the point is that science has changed since then. We don't think that anymore. Now we think what we are motivated by is emotions. You're motivated by your feelings because of everything I just said. And that's what we have to work with and become aware of. And if you are good at understanding not only what you feel, but what you feel underneath what you feel, because there's usually an emotion underneath an emotion, particularly anger. Just knowing you're angry doesn't tell you anything. You need to know what's the emotion underneath your anger. When you get good at that, you get good at connecting with other people, because that's what connects us. Now, I like you if you agree with what I think, but I feel connected to you if you respond to how I feel. That changes the dynamic entirely. So we want to be around people who are emotionally responsive. So it's not just getting emotions out like Janoff thought. No, it's expressing them in a way that facilitates a response in the other person. If you respond to my feelings with your genuine feelings, then we feel connected. And that's what connects us. Susan Johnson calls it the science of love. We've figured out now that marriage counseling isn't about agreeing to certain tasks. You do these tasks and all of those tasks. No, it's figuring out how to speak to each other so we feel connected afterwards. Whether or not we agree about the task is secondary to feeling connected. So that's the function of emotions. That I think we are ontologically made to be relational people, and we have this capacity in our brain to express ourselves in a way that makes us feel connected to God and others. And that is that we become intelligent expressors of emotion. And if we don't do that, then we have serious problems, sometimes very serious problems. We talked about loneliness 2 weeks ago. The Surgeon General, Vivek Murthy, issued a warning just last year about an epidemic of loneliness in the United States. Did you know this? The Surgeon General? There's an epidemic of loneliness. May of 2023. He said 50% of Americans report suffering from loneliness. They have 3 or fewer close friends. When the highest percentage, even more than 50%, are young adults, sadly. They're the ones who express the most loneliness. Only 39% of adults say they feel very connected to others. And the mortality risk of loneliness is equal to smoking 15 cigarettes a day. Yeah, it's that deadly. Physical health consequences of people who report high on loneliness: 29% risk of heart disease, 32% increased risk of stroke, 50% increase in the risk of developing dementia in the elderly, 50%, 30% increased risk of premature death. Loneliness is a problem, and his Surgeon General says it's a killer, actually, for people who are feeling lonely and they can't seem to find their way out of it. So his definition of loneliness, I think, is a good one. Inadequate, meaningful connections. And what that means is you can come to church and feel lonely because you're around other people, but you have inadequate, meaningful connections. And meaningful connections are ones where you share your feelings vulnerably with other people and they share them back with you. Those are the meaningful connections. And if you're not good at that, you can end up being in a crowd and being very, very lonely. John.
And the more I spend time myself as I get older and more, is I cherish it. It's where I get thinking done, where I get reading done, I get projects to do, I keep very active.
Yeah.
I read, I do, and I cherish that more than I cherish being with. I never get lonely. And I started worrying about myself, is something wrong with me that I don't get lonely?
We don't think anything's wrong with your job. No.
Not for that reason, anyway.
Not in that way, no, as we talked about 2 weeks ago, yes, the ability to be alone is very important. And that means you must have meaningful connections. If you have meaningful, which you do, you have meaningful connections. You've known some people in this room for 40 years. If you have meaningful connections, then you can be alone and it's not lonely. It's a sign of mental health, good mental health, to be able to be alone and not feel lonely. But if you feel lonely, it means you need to work on meaningful connections with others. You need more in-depth, meaningful connections. That's what that's telling you. Your loneliness tells you, okay, are you emotionally vulnerable? Are you around people who are emotionally vulnerable? Are you sharing those feelings back and forth? Are you responding to people emotionally? Or is it just transactional? Are your relations transactional? You can end up having relationships, but yet still feeling lonely because you're not having a meaningful connection to other people. And church, I think, has always been a central place for us to do that. We were just talking about this earlier, that community at church is one of the most important aspects of church, where you have meaningful connections. And you know this, in 1972, 45% of Americans, no, this is trust, let me give you the other one. In 1999, let's go back to 1999. That's not that long ago. I remember 1999. 70% of Americans belong to a church. Today, 47%. First time in history, it's dipped below 50%.
Has that data been updated since the pandemic? I think it's less than that since.
It's probably less than that. You're right. No, that data is a couple years old. So it's probably less than that. People, well, I don't know if they would consider online membership. I don't know what they think, but it's probably less than that, right? But people are not getting the same kind of community connection that they've always needed. They've always needed. And church has been one of the most powerful ways for us to get that meaningful connection that we need. We don't trust each other anymore. That's the statistic I was going to give you. In 1972, 45% of Americans trusted other Americans. And today it's less than 30%. It's dropped, probably even worse than that. We don't trust. So we're not going to open up because we don't trust, because of things we were talking about, People using social media more than 2 hours a day are twice as lonely as those who only use it 30 minutes a day. You kind of knew that, right?
Have any of these statistics been broken down by age? I was thinking people going to church, 1999, is it people under 35 that are not going to church, or is it?
Well, I'm
Is it
sure,
done by age?
I'm sure he has. I mean, that's his job, survey this stuff. But that's always been true. People in their 30s have always not attended church well because they've got kids, and their lives are busy, and they're still trying to just separate from their parents, and then they come back around later. That's always been somewhat true. But it's different now.
Really?
Yeah.
That's what brought me to church.
What?
Kids.
Kids? Yeah.
And wanting that support and wanting that sense of community and
You made the right choice.
yeah.
Right. Yeah, and I think if you don't have a good kids program, you're not gonna have a church that lasts,
It was hard to compete with soccer.
Yes.
Yeah.
Everybody playing games,
I know.
sports on Sunday now morning.
I know. I know. AOSO doesn't care if you're religious, they got another agenda. But it's that these are the things we need to think about. He says, the Surgeon General says, social isolation is arguably the strongest and most reliable predictor of suicidal ideation, their attempts, and lethal suicidal behavior. Meaningful connection is the antidote to that. So we have one of the most powerful antidotes to loneliness here. You're it. You're here, a lot of you are here because I know you're connected to the other people in this group. This is your community. This is your people you can go to and talk about these things. And I think that that's an important function of the church, and that if he's right, you will live longer if you stay connected to church. That we know that people who are connected, it's as if you were smoking 15 cigarettes a day, but you're not now because you're connected. It's that healthy. It promotes health that strongly. And I think Jesus advocated this too. I think he was psychologically brilliant. He used the language of his time. But you remember when he said, at that time, the disciples came to Jesus and they asked him, who's the greatest in the kingdom of heaven? And he called a little child and had him stand among them. And he said, I tell you the truth, unless you change to become like little children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Therefore, whoever humbles himself like this child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. I mean, he's always doing stuff like that. What? You have to be childlike, but not childish.
Big difference.
There's a big difference. Childlike, but not childish. What is childlike? Childlike is trusting. What are children? They're just emotional, curious, spontaneous, and will tell you how they feel. They're driven by how they feel, right? If they're angry, you know it. If they're sad, you know it. If they're hurt, you know it. They're just expressive of it. They're childlike, not childish, which is irresponsible. You know the difference between spontaneity and impulsiveness? Impulsiveness is, okay, I can't stand how I feel. I got to do something else. I got to get away from how I'm feeling, so I can impulsively just do something. Spontaneity is, hey, I really would like to do that. I want to feel more of that feeling, so I'm going to choose to do that. So spontaneity goes towards feelings, impulsiveness goes away from feelings. And you know the difference. When you're around people who are impulsive, it just irritates you. You know, it's like, why are you so antsy? You know, let's just figure out, maybe this is a good restaurant right here. Well, don't be so impulsive. And when you're around people spontaneous, you kind of like that. It's like, yeah, that sounds good. Let's do that. I would prefer Italian. Come on. You know, they're driven by the love of something as opposed to driven away of the fear of something. So there's a distinction between childlike and childish. You want to be spontaneous, but not impulsive. You want to be aware of how you feel and love your feelings and love to go in the direction of feelings, not to be afraid of how you feel and trying to get away from them. Running away is never a good direction. You don't really understand why you're running if you're running away. So childlike is to be innocent, trusting, open to emotions, but also have a direction. I know where I'm going. I'm going towards something. Emotions are emotion. Emotions motivate us to do something. They motivate us to go in a direction, either toward or away. Let me give you an example. A woman I'll call Harriet. I disguise all the stories I tell you. Bits and pieces of it are moved around and names are all fake to protect the guilty. So Harriet had a history of intense conflictual relationships that never seemed to work out. She had frequent anger outbursts when she was disappointed. But she's had enough therapy in her life to admit that she has issues with abandonment, so she can tell you that she's got insight, but she's still very impulsive. Harry can't see that what she does to contribute to relational problems, but she's very good at articulating what everybody else is doing wrong. She's very insightful with everybody else's problems. A little psychology is dangerous. She gets furious with anyone and everyone. She feels entitled to rage, scream, and throw tantrums. She believed therapists were supposed to handle this, so she would scream and yell in our sessions all the time. And when I would kind of ask her what she's trying to get at, she said, I'm just expressing my feelings. You know, I'm just getting them out. She wasn't from Janoff's group, but she acted like it. She would have childish outbursts, and you know what I mean. There were hurting relationships and hurting feelings about herself. See, underneath her bravado and what was really kind of grandiosity is low self-esteem. And you know this, that the people who are arrogant or grandiose, the underbelly of that is shame, really. You can't have too much self-confidence. That's an oxymoron, right? It's people who act arrogant, really act that way because they've got unhealed shame underneath them. So she's got low self-esteem, which when you have that way, then you're easily injured. So people can easily say things that upset you and you get injured. Then you get angry, because as I've said before, I'd rather be angry than feel hurt or small. And then she acts in ways that are impulsive, that first make her feel a little bit better because she doesn't want to feel hurt and small anymore. So she's angry and yells. And then afterwards, it really makes her feel bad about herself because she mistreats people. It lowers her self-esteem. Then we start all over again. So you have low self-esteem, which means you're going to be easily hurt, which means you're prone to anger outbursts, which means you mistreat people. That makes you feel bad about yourself because nobody really likes mistreating people. Well, there's some sociopaths, but apart from them, most of us feel bad about mistreating other people, which lowers your self-esteem and predisposes you to do the whole thing all over again. So you're just caught in this cycle. The cycle of rage, we call it. The narcissistic rage, that's what we call it, comes from shame. The people who feel entitled to act this way, this impulsive, this rude, really, this self-centered, really don't feel good about themselves. So we were eventually able to identify that cycle and open up to the feelings underneath anger. See, anger, you've heard me say this, anger is like a red light on your dashboard. It tells you there's a problem, but the problem is under the hood. So you have to figure out what's under the hood. Hurt, fear, frustration, shame, what's under the hood? Because anger doesn't get you very far. It just alerts you to a problem. It's energy to solve a problem. But you got to figure out what that is. And that takes work, takes sophistication. Why am I so angry? Why did I get so angry? Well, ask yourself. Something hurt you? Something scare you? Something frustrate you? You have long-standing, people who have chronic rage fits like Harriet have underlying shame that's not been healed. And so we have to slow that way, way down to identify the feeling underneath the feeling. And once she could do that, she could talk to me in a more childlike manner and talk about her feelings of vulnerability, talk about the injuries throughout her life that have made her feel bad about herself, and less in need of childish temper tantrums that weren't helping her or helping her relationships either. So she started to change the way she spoke to people. Instead of yelling at them, she'd say, well, that hurt my feelings. That's a start. That's a start. Let's go there. Or I felt left out. I felt alone. I felt you didn't like talking to me, or something that was more vulnerable. That changes the conversation. And the most important thing it did for her is it changed how she felt about herself. Because if you have that vulnerable conversation with people, you go away feeling good, feel better about yourself because you spoke to people in a way that works. That's how we're made. We really do want to have effective conversations. I want to leave my relationships with people with them glad that they talk to me, not wishing I would just go away. You know, we want to get better at that because that helps us feel better about ourselves. And that lifts your self-esteem. So she stopped the cycle of rage and she began to increase her self-esteem. And as her behavior changed, she did too. And the thing that heals shame, you've heard me say this, is grace. There's only one cure for shame, and that's acceptance, is what we call it in psychology. And not acceptance for grandiosity, because that's bravado. That's not the real person. It's acceptance for how you really feel inside. If you know how I really feel with those vulnerable feelings and you accept me, that heals that shame. That makes me feel worthy because I've been honest, I've been vulnerable, I've been real with you. And that's what connects us. Because those vulnerable kinds of conversations that are, they're genuine and spontaneous because we're going towards feelings, not away from them. And not impulsive, which is an attempt to run away and hide from painful feelings that we wish weren't there but are. Let me pause for a second. Anybody have any questions or comments you want to make so far? Yeah.
What is the origin of shame?
Well,
Why would one?
shame is about who you are. Guilt is about what you do. So if I do something bad, I feel guilty, and then I want to repair it. And that's actually healthy. Shame is about who I am. It's not that I did something bad, I am bad. I'm the kind of person that would do that, and I personalize it, right? And we think the origins of shame are the video I showed 2 weeks ago, the still face video, that as from infancy on, we need a response back from our caregivers. And it's all emotional, it's all amygdala communication. If you ever talk to a 9-month-old, it's, there's not a lot of language going on there. So but you are responding, you are talking. There's a mirroring going back and forth, right? And if you don't get that, you begin to feel bad about yourself. And it starts very young. If I don't get a responsiveness back from the people around me that makes me feel that my feelings are valued and I'm valuable, then I start to feel I'm not valued and I'm not valuable. And it's an amygdala thing. It's not a rational thing. It's based on emotional experiences. And we started to figure this out, that there were orphanages where this is during World War II, where the children would fail to thrive, and they were failing to thrive because the nurses were too busy. They were just trying to care of their physical needs, right? They figured, oh no, for so many hours a day, each baby needs to be held. So they started holding them and cuckooing with them and the stuff that you automatically do with a baby, and the babies started thriving again, right? That they were dying from the lack of emotional responsiveness. Yes.
I was gonna ask you about children in orphanages or highly neglected children or babies, infants. What happens when they're not being nurtured that way, but that they just develop like a shame their whole lives?
Yeah, unfortunately, yeah. When we look at conduct disordered adolescents, the percentage of those who were adopted or not raised by two parents in the home is really high. Yeah, it's damaging.
But what about like children who are adopted from orphanages, but maybe not right away? Say, I have a friend who picked up her infant when she was almost 9 months old.
Pretty young.
Pretty young. Is there like a stage where that need for validation is beyond repair?
No, there isn't. There isn't any, because everybody's different. Like we talked about last week, there are highly sensitive people. There are some babies that are just very sensitive, and they grew up in a very normal home with both parents, and they still didn't get what they needed. And then we've got kids who were raised in orphanages who weren't as sensitive, and they turn out fine, right? And this too. People who grew up in terrible circumstances. They seem to be really normal people today, right? Because they got what they needed from their environment. There was someone there for them in a way that worked for them. And then you also know people who were raised right here in Brentwood, two parents in the home, and they turned out a wreck. Those cases too, right? Because they might have been one of those highly sensitive people that just needed more than anybody could give them. So it's individualized. There's no way we can say like past 9 months.
No formula.
No, there's no formula. No, we're people, exactly. Which we should all be humble about that, right?
But I have read that the first 2 years are extremely
They are.
important in a individual's life. So that's kind of not, you're kind of saying.
In general, that's true, but you can't make that statement about everybody's specific case. There are specific cases that just defy the odds, just in both directions, by the way. So if you had a kid that didn't turn out well, maybe it wasn't your fault totally. Yes.
You said what I found interesting, in couples therapy, for example, it's moving more from, trying to find compromise on issues.
Yeah.
Basically more compromise on emotions, which makes total sense. However, everything you say about the amygdala, let's say if two people have a completely different emotional response to certain issues, topics, whatever that is, let's say, the practical topics, whatever, who does what.
Yep.
What do you do then? Because how can you manipulate or change the feeling about it.
Yeah.
Oh, so you feel this is how I feel, let's meet feeling in the middle.
Spoken like a man. It's a lot of work, and yes, of course, you both come in to a relationship with different emotional background, different experiences, different ways of expressing your feelings. But what's most important is that you realize that the conversation, when you run into conflict, is driven by feelings. That's most important. So then you try to drop down to this level and, okay, what's going on here? I've hurt you, I've scared you, I've offended you, and I want to try to figure this out, because if you're trying to reason your way through solving issues of shame, you can't get there. If it's shame is the issue, grace is the only thing that's going to heal it, and that's not a concept, it's an experience. It's an experience of acceptance. Grace is not an intellectual concept, it's a phenomenological experience. So we want to create communication in a way that makes us feel connected, so that we can return to the intellectual conversation and not have someone or both of us be so activated. I think I've said this before. I think I probably said everything I ever know in this room. So I'm just repeating myself. Anyway, Sue Johnson has done a lot of research in this area, and I mentioned this before, that she took couples, married couples, and she taught half of them problem-solving skills, she taught the other half emotional communication skills. Then they gave them a problem to solve, and the emotional communication skills group did better than the problem-solving skills.
Yeah.
Why? Because you already know how to solve problems pretty well. You waste all your time fighting. You know, we should go this way. No, we'll go that way. I think we should try this. No, we're going to try that. And it becomes an ego power thing, and you waste all your energy fighting because you don't feel connected. But if we feel connected, all of our resources are freed up for us to then solve problems with the skills we already had to begin with. So, and she loves that research, because that's all she does, you know, is teach people how to communicate with their emotions. But we waste so much time and energy fighting about feelings. Sometimes we don't even know what the feelings are. And we're fighting about these feelings, and then we're arguing with content up here that goes nowhere. It spins around and around. We've got to feel connected in order to solve the issue in marriage.
So if I put
especially.
this in context of a meeting of people that have a problem to solve, does that imply then that there's gold to be mined and spending some time going around the room and saying, how does this problem make us feel?
Well, you're talking about in a work environment now.
Or, yes, but it could be in any environment where you have a group of people trying to solve an issue.
Well, we're
It could be session.
It could be session, yeah. Well, that's more personal. The more personal it is, the more important the feelings are. Now, in certain work environments, your boss doesn't care how you feel. He just wants you to produce.
But as a tool for solving problems.
Yeah. If there's conflict, there's likely emotions involved, yes.
And so is there a branch here that says, hey, we could be a more effective team if we take a time out and ask ourselves, how does this problem make us feel?
We now know that EQ is just as important as IQ in leadership. We didn't know that before. You want leaders who can read the room, leaders who pick up on when there's an emotional issue. They know it's an emotional issue, and they need to find a way to address that. Because, and I deal with executives all the time, very, very successful executives, guys running multi-million-dollar organizations, and they're just wasting so much time posturing with egos and fighting over turf, and they want the corner office or whatever it is. It's just, the resources are so wasted because there's an emotional conflict going on between two guys in the organization. And whoever is in the position of management needs to figure that part out.
Yeah. I mean, because I can trace in my career the time in my life where I started becoming aware of how the people in the room were feeling about things, and being able to recognize that's feeling, that's not, right? And that person is responding out of an emotion that needs to be addressed as an emotion. This person is trying to look at facts and data, and so this person will address the facts and data.
Right, and they're missing each other.
And you're trying to merge that. When you're trying to create a team that's working on something, you're trying to merge that, validate the feelings, understand them, because sometimes there's something important driving them that they're not in touch with.
Yep.
But they're trying to tell you something. there's information there.
They're
There's information to be gathered.
there's information to be gathered. That's a great way of looking at it.
But what I hadn't really thought about does it really make sense maybe even to be more intentional about it and start with that? And clear it up, or just incorporate it in the whole overall process?
Yeah, that's a much bigger conversation because you can't just put people in a room and then tell them to be vulnerable with their feelings. You know, it can backfire, it can really backfire.
There's nothing to do it.
Yeah.
Talking time.
Yeah, you gotta make wise choices about that. Because sometimes we go in with what we're well intended, right? Where we want to get everybody in the room, we're gonna hug it out, you know, get everybody in the room there and talk about how you feel. That can really backfire. So, but yeah, you're thinking along the right lines, but how we implement that would require some careful thought. I don't want you to.
No, another thing that you were mentioning is that there's a great case study about the US destroyer that shut down an Iranian airliner some 30 years ago. That was flying over a commercial assigned route on a normal schedule, and that somehow the destroyer interpreted that as being an F-14 attacking the destroyer. And
Shut it down.
and people, it shut it down, and so, you know, the Navy was like, well, how the hell does that happen, right? And it's this confirmation bias thing where you look at data that supports your position.
Right.
And ignore the data that doesn't.
Right.
And it can have dramatic international consequences when it happens.
Absolutely. I would say we all need to slow down. Let me just close with this one comment. This is a guy that I saw in marriage counseling for a number of years, and he was a guy. So he was happy to come to marriage counseling because of his wife's feelings, right? So, and he saw his wife's feelings as the problem, and he genuinely was trying to help her with her emotional problems, right? Tell me what's going on, I'll try to fix it. And he says things like, I want you to be happy, and it hurts me to see you fall apart. When she gets emotions, it's falling apart, right? So he viewed her as the emotionally ill person, and he was the kind doctor, you know, trying to help his emotionally ill wife. And I finally figured out that's what he was thinking. He really was trying to help. What he was doing was so demeaning, you know, by viewing her as falling apart. So after years of therapy, he got better, and then he sent me this note. This is actually a note from him. I feel tricked. For all those years, what I thought was a fire extinguisher turned out to be a can of gasoline. And what I thought was a can of gasoline was actually a very effective fire retardant. These were gravely mislabeled, and I fell for the lie. I thought responding to Debbie with my true feelings would surely fuel the fire and inflame passions, when in fact, it has the opposite effect. And withholding my feelings, my raw feelings, actually fuels the very thing I sought to prevent. Debbie buttonholing strangers on the street just to talk about her feelings. So if I want to diffuse the situation of high feelings, I must grab the can of gasoline, telling her how I feel, responding authentically and spontaneously to the event, and pour it on. So some men can learn. There you go. All right, thank you very much. It's been great as always.